It was supposed to be a quiet evening, the kind where the only sound is the hum of the air conditioner and the soft tapping of keys as I finish up my work. I just moved into my new house a few months ago. Finally got the space I wanted. No more cramped apartment, no more noise from neighbors, just peace and a view of the woods, or so I thought. But it didn't take long for the trouble to start. Not with the house itself, but with her, Karen. Of course, that wasn't her real name, but it was what everyone in the neighborhood called her. She lived just down the street, and from the moment I met her, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple suburban life. I'd been warned by a few of the older residents. Stay clear of her, they said. She's got control of everything around here. At first, I brushed it off as small-town gossip, but soon enough, Karen started showing up on my doorstep. Not for friendly chats, but with a clipboard, demanding to know if I was following HOA rules. Rules about the color of my fence, the height of my grass, whether or not my trash cans were the right shade of green. Every little thing was a problem. I kept telling her the same thing. I'm following the rules, Karen. But that never seemed to be enough. She always found something new to pick at. Then one evening, I was in the middle of cooking dinner when the lights flickered, then went out completely. I checked the breaker, but everything seemed fine. A quick glance outside revealed nothing unusual, so I grabbed a flashlight and went to check the power box. That's when I saw her, standing at the edge of the street, her car parked by the curb. She was smiling in that way people smile when they think they've won. "You cut my power?" I asked, confused. "What the hell is going on?" She put her hands on her hips, like she was about to deliver some great proclamation. "It's for your safety," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "The power lines here are a hazard. They're too close to the trees. It's just not safe." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What? You don't have the right to shut off my power? I'm paying for that electricity." "I'm doing this for the neighborhood," she said, as if she was the mayor. "The HOA is concerned. You should have received the notice." I didn't receive any notice. None. No warning, no explanation, nothing. But before I could respond, she turned to leave, her heels clicking on the pavement. "I've already notified the utility company. They'll be here to fix it soon enough. But you should really think about the safety of your home." And just like that, she walked off into the night, leaving me in the dark. I stood there for a moment, staring at the power box, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. But as I thought it over, it didn't take long to realize what she'd done. She didn't just cut my power, she'd overstepped. She'd assumed she had control, assumed she could make decisions for me, for everyone. And that's when it hit me. Karen didn't just run the HOA, she thought she ran the whole damn neighborhood. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just a homeowner. I owned the transformer station. I owned the power grid, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I wasn't one for confrontations, but this was different. Cutting my power wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an overreach, an abuse of power. Karen had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. I waited for the utility company to show up, as Karen had claimed, but instead of sitting idly by, I decided to investigate. I called the company the next morning, posing as a concerned neighbor asking about the power outage in my area. I wanted to know what had really happened. The operator gave me a direct answer. No official request had been made by the HOA or anyone else. The shutoff was unauthorized. That was all I needed to hear. I spent the next few hours reviewing the property deeds and zoning information for the neighborhood. When I moved in, I had done my due diligence, invested in the house, made sure everything was in order. But I never thought to check the power grid specifics. Big mistake. The transformer station, the one that serviced the entire block, was on my property. It had been for years. In fact, it was located just behind my garage, on the edge of my land, hidden behind a line of old oaks. It wasn't some obscure detail. It was a key part of how the neighborhood functioned. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was essentially the one who controlled the power for everyone on this block. And that, I realized, was the real reason Karen had decided to cut me off. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I called a contractor to come out and assess the transformer. I wasn't about to make any rash moves without being certain that everything was legally in my hands. But after he took a look, he confirmed what I suspected. I had full legal control over the entire station. If I wanted, I could cut the power to the whole block with the flip of a switch. I had the documents to prove it. By the time the utility company arrived to restore my power, I was already making calls. First to my lawyer, then to a few local authorities who handled property disputes. I needed to know what steps I could take to prevent Karen from pulling this stunt again. What she didn't understand was that when you own the infrastructure, you don't have to take anyone's word for it. I could protect my property and my rights, legally and practically. The worst part? Karen had no idea what was coming. I could already hear her whining on the phone with the utility company, demanding to know why her safety initiative hadn't been followed through. She'd probably convinced herself she was doing a good thing, like some kind of neighborhood savior. I wasn't done yet. By the time the utility company had finished their work, I had a plan in motion. I walked across the street to Karen's house, hands in my pockets, trying to stay calm. The house was quiet, just the way I liked it. No loud parties, no overbearing HOA meetings, just peace. I knocked on her door. A moment later she answered, her fake smile already in place. "I hope you didn't forget about me," I said, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "I'd like to have a conversation about safety." Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly. "What's this about exactly? You got your power back, didn't you?" "Oh, I got my power back," I said, my voice steady. "But I wanted to make sure we were all clear on something. When it comes to power in this neighborhood, I'm the one with the switch." Her face went pale. She stepped back, instinctively glancing around, trying to regain some control. "I own the transformer station," I added, letting the words sink in. "I could have cut your power off for good, but I'm not that petty. However, if I ever have to deal with something like this again, I won't hesitate." Karen's expression shifted. She wasn't the confident HOA president anymore. She was just a woman who had bitten off more than she could chew. "I don't think you realize what you've done," she said, trying to regain some dignity. "The HOA. The HOA doesn't control anything on my land," I interrupted, making sure she heard every word. "And next time, before you mess with someone's livelihood, you might want to know who they are. I don't take kindly to being pushed around." I turned and walked away without giving her a chance to respond. I wasn't done with Karen yet, but the game had changed. The days that followed felt like a waiting game, but one I was now fully prepared for. Karen was rattled. No longer the confident HOA enforcer who could push people around without a second thought. She had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her forget it. But I needed more than just a conversation to make sure she knew I wasn't someone she could intimidate or control. I started looking into everything. I wanted to know if Karen had pulled similar stunts before, if she had a history of abusing her position or getting the HOA to back her up. And as I started digging, I found something troubling. A few of the neighbors, those who had been in the area longer, confirmed my suspicions. Karen had a track record, a long history of using the HOA's influence to force neighbors into compliance, often with the most ridiculous demands. Everything from how high their lawn grass could be, to whether or not their holiday decorations were appropriate. She had gone after a family for parking a second car in their driveway, even though there was no rule against it. And a couple of years ago, a family with young children had been fined repeatedly because their dog was too loud at night, except the dog was deaf. She'd used the HOA to control the neighborhood and make people's lives miserable. But I wasn't like those people. I wasn't going to cave under pressure. I reached out to a few of my neighbors who had quietly been on the receiving end of Karen's overbearing tactics. There was Jeff, a retired firefighter who'd been living in the neighborhood for over 20 years. He'd been fined multiple times for violating the HOA's aesthetic standards, simply because his house wasn't as new as the others. He never got involved because he didn't want the drama. Then there was Linda, who had lived here since the late 90s. Her complaint was that Karen had tried to force her to move her vegetable garden because it didn't fit the neighborhood's look. Together, we decided it was time to stand up. It wasn't just me anymore. Karen had made a habit of pushing people around, and it was time for that to end. I met with Jeff and Linda at my house one afternoon. Over beers and some simple snacks, we shared stories about Karen's overreach, her bullying tactics, and how she had made their lives harder for no reason other than her need to control everything. I recorded our conversations. They were nervous at first, but as we spoke, the anger they'd been holding back for years started to show. "We're not alone in this," I said, "and we're not letting her get away with it anymore." Linda, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, spoke up. "I think we should take this to the county, show them what she's been doing. Maybe it'll put a stop to her once and for all." I agreed. It was time to escalate. I worked with my lawyer to prepare a case. We had enough evidence now. Karen's repeated interference with neighbors, her constant power trips, and the fact that she'd tampered with my power supply without authorization. The HOA's influence was nothing but a shield for her petty authority. And the truth was that this had gone on long enough. I wasn't going to let her drag me or anyone else around anymore. I contacted the local media. They were interested, to say the least. The fact that Karen had cut off someone's power without proper legal grounds was a huge story, especially given her role in the HOA. The reporters came over, and we started organizing interviews with the neighbors who had experienced the same treatment. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, Karen knew something was up. She was trying to play it cool, but you could see the stress in her eyes. She tried to maintain her composure, standing at the front like the queen of the neighborhood, giving the usual speech about community standards and preserving property values. But I could see her faltering. When the meeting turned to new business, I stood up, as calm and collected as I could manage. I addressed the board, then turned to Karen. "I'd like to talk about the recent actions of the HOA president," I began. The room went quiet, "and the illegal actions that have affected my property." I didn't raise my voice, but the words cut through the air. I laid out the timeline, how Karen had interfered with my electricity, how she had acted outside her authority, how she had used her position to control and bully neighbors into submission. I presented the evidence, photos, emails, even the audio recordings from my conversations with Jeff and Linda. And then, as if to drive the point home, I played the footage of Karen cutting off my power, captured from the security cameras I'd installed. The room went silent. People shifted in their seats. It was clear. Karen had lost control. Karen shot me a venomous look, but there was nothing she could say. Her reign of terror was coming to an end. The next day, I received a call from the county, confirming that Karen had been officially removed from her position as HOA president. The community voted her out with a clear majority, and that wasn't all. A local investigator reached out, informing me that the county had started an internal review of the HOA's financials and their influence over residents. For the first time in months, I felt relief. But that wasn't the end of it. With Karen officially removed from her position as HOA president, I thought the storm had passed. But as anyone who's ever dealt with a Karen knows, the trouble doesn't always stop just because you've won a small victory. No, Karen wasn't one to go quietly into the night. The day after the meeting, I was greeted with an unexpected visitor. Linda, the neighbor I'd spoken to during our meeting session at my house. She knocked on my door looking worried. I let her in, and she got straight to the point. "They're not done with you," she said, pacing around my living room. "Karen, she's talking to people. She's trying to rally support from some of the old-timers in the neighborhood." I frowned. "What do you mean, rally support?" "She's not giving up her grip easily. She's trying to get a few people on her side, claiming you're overreacting, saying that you're causing a disturbance, that this whole thing will tear the community apart." That made me laugh bitterly. The only thing she's tearing apart is her own reputation. Linda shook her head. "You don't get it. She's going after your character. She's trying to turn people against you, make it seem like you're the villain here. And she's pulling out all the stops. You need to watch your back." I sat back in my chair, processing everything. I knew she wasn't wrong. Karen had never been someone to back down, and if she was going to fight back, it wouldn't be with reason. It'd be with manipulation, gossip, and whatever other tactics she could come up with. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice steady, but I could feel the tension rising in my chest. "We need to act fast," Linda said, her face more serious than I'd ever seen it. "We can't let her spin this into something it's not. We need to go public, Tom. If we don't, she'll have the upper hand again. You've got the facts, use them." I nodded. "All right, let's take it to the next step. I spent the next few days working with Linda, Jeff, and a couple of other neighbors who'd been affected by Karen's reign. We organized a community meeting, this time not with the HOA, but with the entire neighborhood invited, no agenda, just people, a place for everyone to air their grievances and share their stories. We weren't looking for a fight, we were just making sure that people knew the truth, Karen's truth. The night of the meeting arrived, and the turnout was better than I expected. It wasn't just the usual neighbors who attended HOA meetings. It was people from all over the community, those who had stayed silent for years, scared of retribution. People like Henry, who had been fined for having inappropriate lawn ornaments. People like Julia, who had been harassed for a fence that was too tall. It was clear from the start that Karen's influence was slipping, and when I stood up to speak, the room went silent. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I just told the truth, calmly and clearly. I laid out everything Karen had done, how she'd abused her position, how she'd meddled with my power supply, how she'd terrorized the neighborhood with her petty rules and fines. I showed the evidence, the recordings, the documentation. And the thing was, no one argued. No one stood up to defend her. No one backed her up. By the end of the night, we had a new understanding. The neighborhood was united, not because of me, but because we had all been under Karen's thumb for far too long. She was no longer in control. But it wasn't just about removing her from power. It was about what came next. The new board was elected, a mix of calm, reasonable people who believed in fairness and community. The rules going forward would focus on actual neighborhood issues, not the tiny, insignificant things Karen had tried to control. The victory was satisfying, but it wasn't the end. There was a larger shift happening. People who had been bullied into silence, people who had felt powerless, now had a voice. They weren't afraid anymore. The next few weeks were filled with little victories. The HOA bylaws were rewritten to ensure that no single person would ever have that kind of control again. The old rules were revisited, and the new ones reflected what we all wanted: respect, fairness, and understanding. But Karen, she didn't just disappear. About a month later, I ran into her at the grocery store. She was standing in the aisle looking down at a stack of coupons, clearly trying to avoid eye contact. But I saw her first. I didn't approach her with anger, but with the same calmness I'd adopted during the whole ordeal. I just gave her a nod and said, "How's the HOA life treating you?" She looked up, eyes flashing with anger, but then she quickly composed herself. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're going to regret this." I smiled because I knew she was all talk now. "No, Karen, I don't think I will." And that was that. The last of Karen's influence was finally gone. As I walked out of the store, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The fight wasn't just about power or about me. It was about standing up for what's right. And now I could finally breathe. But I knew one thing for sure. In the quiet streets of my neighborhood, I was in control now. And that wasn't something Karen or anyone else could ever take away. The weeks after Karen's departure were peaceful, but there was a palpable shift in the air around the neighborhood. It wasn't just about getting rid of her. It was about reclaiming the space that had been taken from us, the sense of community that Karen had tried to crush. People walked a little taller, talked a little freer. It felt like we had finally taken back control of our own lives. The HOA, once a place where power-hungry tyrants like Karen could push their agendas, was now a forum for actual discussions. The meetings had gone from tense, passive-aggressive affairs to real conversations about how we wanted to live. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started attending, some even volunteering to help out with local projects. It wasn't a perfect community, but it was one we could be proud of. No more threats over lawn ornaments or holiday decorations. No more fines for the most trivial reasons. It felt like a weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. As for me, life returned to its simple rhythm. I had a newfound respect for the power of standing up, not just for myself, but for those who didn't have the voice to speak up. But even in this newfound peace, there was something I hadn't expected, something that hit me harder than I realized. I went to visit my grandmother's grave, just a short walk away from my cabin. It was something I did every few months. As I sat there, the wind rustling the trees around me, I thought about how different things were now. She would have been proud of me, I thought. She always believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the text message from Jeff, one of my neighbors who had become a close friend over the past few months. Karen's back in town. Just saw her at the grocery store. A cold shiver ran through me. She couldn't be. She'd left, right? No way she'd come back after everything that had happened. But as I read Jeff's message again, a new sense of unease crept over me. I thought about how angry she had been the last time I saw her. I thought about how she had never truly accepted defeat. And I realized that even though she'd lost the battle for the HOA presidency, Karen was never going to be the type to give up easily. I texted back. What did she say? She's planning to attend the HOA meeting next week, Jeff wrote. She says she's taking back control. My stomach dropped. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be concerned. Karen was coming back? After everything? Was she really this delusional? I couldn't help it. I had to see it for myself. The next HOA meeting came quickly. I walked in, a little more alert than usual, feeling the nerves building in my chest. I had learned not to underestimate Karen. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. As I entered the community center, I immediately noticed her. There she was, sitting at the front like she belonged there, clipboard in hand, a smug expression on her face. But there was something different in her eyes this time, a desperation, like she had nothing left to lose. She glanced up as I took a seat near the back. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment it felt like the whole room held its breath. There were whispers around us. Karen had been an authoritative figure in the community for so long that her return was unexpected, unwelcome even. The meeting began, but the tension in the air was palpable. Karen wasn't here to be reasonable. She was here to reclaim what she thought was hers. She started talking, just like before, about community standards and preserving the integrity of the neighborhood. The same tired rhetoric that had gotten her into trouble the first time. But this time was different. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. As soon as she finished her speech, I stood up. I think we've heard enough, I said, my voice calm, but firm. Karen, you were voted out because you abused your power. You're here now, trying to do the same thing again. But this time, it's not going to work. She shot me a look that could have frozen ice. You have no right to speak to me like that, she hissed, but her voice trembled. You're right, I don't, I said. But I do have the right to protect this neighborhood from people like you, and everyone here knows it. There was a murmur in the room. Karen's supporters, the few who remained, looked uncomfortable. The rest of the room was watching, waiting for the inevitable collapse of Karen's power trip. Linda stood up, a woman who had been one of Karen's primary targets. Tom's right, she said, her voice gaining strength. We voted her out because she's dangerous to this community. She's not here to help. She's here to control. Karen tried to speak over Linda, but no one listened. The board members, those who had once hesitated, now backed us up. One by one, people spoke. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to live in. By the end of the meeting, Karen was not only removed from the board, but the remaining members of the HOA announced they were restructuring the rules. No one would have the authority to rule over others again. Decisions would be made as a collective, with a focus on community, not control. I left the meeting feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I'd fought for what was right, and we had won. But Karen's brief return had reminded me of something important. Peace wasn't always easy. It had to be fought for. The rest of the night was quiet. The neighborhood was calm. I stood in my yard for a while, looking at the stars above, letting the silence settle over me. I had faced down someone who thought they could control everything, and now I was finally free, and so was the neighborhood.